show, we have Dr. Matt Brown, a psychiatrist out of the Chicago area. He is also a DO and MBA. DO means a doctor of, I think it's osteopathic medicine. Yeah, we have a great conversation, goes all over the map. We talk about events happening in Chicago, like the psychedelic meetup clubs, creating your own psychedelic meetup, perspectives on psychedelics, creating community in general. I think that's kind of just an underlying theme around meetups. Introducing more voices into the conversation besides medical professionals and students. You know, perhaps artists and other creative people can really help provide various insights into the psychedelic conversation that we're not having. I think we need not just cultural and race diversity, we need cognitive diversity, people doing different stuff. And you know, an artist is going to have really different comments than a doctor, and vice versa. A landscaper is going to have really different opinions. So maybe all these people need to come to the table, and we can get a higher collective intelligence by talking to one another, and that's kind of the magic that happens in a psychedelic club like that. I'm going to read you the bio from Matt Brown's page, his website, and you can get to his website from our show notes here at psychedelicstoday.com. Dr. Matt Brown specializes in whole health psychiatry. This approach differs from many other practitioners who more and more practice symptomatic management when it comes to mental health. Dr. Brown takes the perspective that the body has the ability to heal itself, but from time to time may need assistance through balancing the needs, the things that are important for physical health that are also important for mental health. These include sleep, diet, exercise, meditative, spiritual practice, and cultivating positive social relationships. Dr. Brown also has a strong command of how to balance vital nutrients in our body with the aid of supplements to augment traditional psychopharmacological therapies. Dr. Matt Brown's method is aimed primarily at treatment of depression and anxiety, as well as other mood disorders and ADHD. Dr. Brown is a specialist in the treatment of OCD specifically, and is board certified by the ABPN in both adult as well as child and adolescent psychiatry. So we really hope you enjoy the show. If you want to give us some feedback or help us out, leave us a review on iTunes or Facebook. Tell your friends. That's probably the best way, honestly. Don't forget about the book giveaway contest. We'll have you a little bit more details about that in a moment. Thanks again for listening, and now for some business. If you want to look really cool in some Psychedelics Today gear, you really want to check out psychedelicstodayshop.com. We've got all sorts of cool stuff, from t-shirts to mugs to shower curtains and pillows. So you check it out. Any small purchase helps, even if it's just some stickers. We got some cool stickers there. Check it out, psychedelicstodayshop.com. Tell your friends. We would love you guys to check out some of our stuff there and support the show. Thanks. Kyle and I decided to raise some funds using Patreon, which is a really cool way to support the show, because you can choose to donate a small portion of money monthly for certain prizes. We are allowing you guys access to interviews before they will ever hit the web. So, for instance, this Horizons episode, they've had that for a few days, and I believe there's some panel discussion stuff we've recorded and made available there. You'll probably also have access to some member or patron-only webinars. We also have rewards including t-shirts, stickers, mugs, access to our Navigating Psychedelics class, and much more. So check it out, patreon.com/psychedelics today, or you can get a link from our site, psychedelicstoday.com. Kyle and I decided to run another book giveaway contest. We're giving away a ton of stuff here, and all you have to do is give us your email. You can sign up over at psychedelicstoday.com. It's called the Ultimate Psychedelic Book Giveaway. Probably close to $350 worth of stuff. So let me read off the list of stuff you can get here. Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss, Dennis McKenna. LSD, My Problem Child, Reflections on Sacred Drugs, Mysticism, and Science by Albert Hoffman. The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide by Fadiman. P-Call, A Chemical Love Story by the Shulgins. Dirty Pictures about Sasha Shulgin. LSD, Doorway to the Numinous by Groff. Adventures of Self-Discovery by Groff, Healing Our Deepest Wounds. The Ultimate Journey, When the Impossible Happens, and Holotropic Breathwork, all by Groff. And that last one was co-written with his late wife, Christina. And you get a seat in our class, Navigating Psychedelics, lessons on self-care and integration. More on that soon. You also get a Psychedelics Today t-shirt and mug. Yeah, we're roughly guessing this is about $350 worth of stuff. If you want to sign up, check us out, psychedelicstoday.com, and you'll see the link for a giveaway. You'll see my face with holding some books. You just click that and you get there. The more you share, the more you increase your odds of winning. Some folks have shared it all over Reddit, YouTube, various forums they're in, and it really has increased their odds of winning. So you just, we'll email you a link after you sign up. You share that. The more people that sign up through your link, the more chances you get to win. The contest ends January 1, so make sure to get your entries into the contest before then. Best of luck.
Welcome back to Psychedelics Today with Kyle and Joe. Today we're going to talk to Dr. Matt Brown, an organizer over at the Psychedelics and Future of Psychiatry, and also with the Chicago Psychedelic Club. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Hey, thanks, Kyle. How's it going?
Not too bad.
Good. Hey, Joe.
Hello. I always forget they can't necessarily see the video.
Yeah, that's okay.
So we're having you on today to chat a little bit about what's going on in Chicago, a little bit about your work and your interest as a psychiatrist in psychedelics, because there's a lot to chat about. Obviously, there's way too many books to read, way too many articles coming out. They're fast and furious. And what we just chatted about a moment ago was the fact that your events are trying to be really academic focused, so like focusing on the actual science coming out, as opposed to just kind of like building community and, having a place for psychedelic heads to go hang out or something.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was just chatting about with Kyle right before we hit play here, or hit record, is that really in Chicago we have two, they're connected, but they're a little bit of separate groups. We have the Meetup, which is where everything started, which is Psychedelics and the Future of Psychiatry. And yeah, like you mentioned, that is a very academic group. It started off mostly as a journal club. So I was sending out a journal article. Everyone was supposed to read it ahead of time. Granted, maybe most people do. But then we kind of just talk about it and then have like a group discussion about like what could we possibly learn from this and take home from it. The way this whole thing started was that I realized that I was having the same conversation over and over and over again with my colleagues at work. Again, psychiatrist, and this is when I was in child and adolescent fellowship. And it was cool that everyone was really open to it, but it just seemed a little redundant. And I was trying to come up with some sort of a way that I could maybe open it up to a larger audience to get more different perspectives on the research that's going on, just because I feel that looking at things through just that lens as a physician is great, but it's still very limiting. And really the concept that we're trying to investigate here is one just of consciousness in general. And I feel like that's something that just about everybody from all different walks of life can have input on. And by opening up this conversation to the general public, we can learn like a lot more together rather than through just like that scientific thing.
Mm. Can you give us an example of like how that would be limited in that circle of, was that circle just mainly psychiatrists and doctors, or did you have counselors and like students in there?
Yeah, I mean, every once in a while we get a medical student rotating through, and then I'd go off on some rant about, ayahuasca or DMT or something like that, and have to kind of educate them because, again, this is not something that typically we learn about in medical education. And certainly there were different therapists that were around that would be intrigued and they want to get in on the conversation. But by and large, I'd say it was mostly the other residents and fellows that I was working with, both originally in Kansas City and then at University of Chicago, where I did my fellowship. And so the conversation would normally start about like, well, what does this mean? What is a psychedelic? Like, what is the experience like? And then just we talk about metaphysics for like about an hour. And it was just sort of like the same thing over and over again without really asking more interesting questions. Just kind of like, okay, yeah, we know how the brain works. And like, this is doing some other weird stuff. And, maybe it's magic, I guess. But yeah, so the idea was that I wanted to get other perspectives and like try to figure out what artists think, what musicians think, what lawyers think, what accountants think, just other people that would certainly not be like, okay, yeah, I know how the brain works, but like, wow, like this is really interesting, and like, and just try to learn not only how the brain works, but how it works under the influence of psychedelics. And not only that, but just to realize that you don't necessarily need psychedelics to reach a psychedelic state. And so then what does that mean? And if you actually don't need psychedelics and you can reach a psychedelic state, okay, so then consciousness is malleable. And so what else do we learn about consciousness, and what does that say about the human condition and all of that?
That's awesome. What are the conversations like introducing, say, artists and other people into the circle? Like, how is that diversifying the conversation?
Well, I just think that new questions tend to come up, such as, I'm trying to think of a good example. I guess really it's more of you just see people light up with interest. For instance, the only thing that's coming to mind right now, and I'm sure I could come up with some other examples if I had some time to think about it, but there's this guy who's been coming to the meetup for quite some time. We're about to celebrate our 2nd year anniversary here in like January. And I think he's like maybe 3 or 4 months in, starting to come fairly regularly. And he's in the field of like business, finance, that kind of stuff. But he got really, really interested and started reading a lot about the history of psychedelic research, and realized that, yeah, there is a lot out there, but it has not necessarily been consolidated. And so then he got really interested in trying to sort of put all this information together in hopes of putting out some sort of like a publication on like history of psychedelic research. And this is not at all anything that he does during the day. This is just something that he became very interested in and more passionate about. And he's trying to move forward with that. So again, just kind of like opening up people's eyes to different possibilities, and being open to sharing their thoughts, even though they don't necessarily come from a scientific background. It does not mean that their thoughts are not valid. In fact, they are just as valid as anybody else's.
Mm-hmm. There is this concept of like citizen science, I guess, in psychedelia that is, I don't necessarily think represented well enough. Like there is a whole ton of development in psychedelia. Like even if you just look at the DMT and NDMT subculture, like they've almost made a whole dictionary to help describe the phenomenon they encounter, and that's pretty substantial. I don't know what other kind of science they might be doing, but you could spend some time on the forums and probably, as a scientist, learn quite a bit of stuff.
Oh, for sure.
And that seems to be related a little bit to this book idea, for sure. Yeah, it's kind of cool that people are able to get involved and not necessarily have credentials as a researcher or a doctor. So what made you, I guess, become interested in psychedelia or psychedelics in general?
Sure. So serious interest as far as looking at psychedelics as medicine really started when I was during my adult residency training for psychiatry when I was in Kansas City. So during our second year of our residency, we had to staff the emergency department at night for about 4 months out of the year. And so during that time, like my schedule was completely flipped. Like, so I was awake working at night, and then I was sleeping during the day. And just because it was impossible to kind of shift back to working or to being awake during the day and then going back to working at night on the days off, I'd be up at night at home while everybody else was asleep and then sleeping during the day. So I had to figure out some stuff to fill up my time. And at that point is when I started to discover podcasts. As far as listening to some podcasts, I started listening to Kevin Smith's podcast because I was a big Kevin Smith fan back in the day. And he introduced me to another guy who has a very prominent podcast named Joe Rogan. And one day I was listening to his podcast and he started talking about this ayahuasca stuff that I was like, all right, this is weird. I hadn't really heard about that before. And supposedly it's, some kind of medicine, whatever. Interestingly enough, that same week, and honestly, I can't remember which happened first, the podcast or this other conversation, I was meeting with one of my attending preceptors. He was an older gentleman. He was a child psychiatrist from Peru. And I made a comment about a painting that he had in his office. And he said, "Oh, you like that painting? That painting is of an ayahuasca vision. Have you ever heard of ayahuasca?" And he went on to tell me that this is a traditional healing modality from his native land of Peru. One of his lifelong goals was to integrate both the traditional healing methods from Peru with Western medicine technique to see if that might be something to help people. And I was kind of taken aback by this and kind of inspired and just thinking like, well, what the hell is this ayahuasca stuff? I mean, like, I haven't heard about this in like 30 years of life. And, this is medicine. So I started reading about ayahuasca, and that's really what led me down the rabbit hole to all various different types of psychedelics and thinking of it more as like medicine rather than something that, you do on the weekend or at a club to kind of get high or something.
Yeah. And that guy was in Kansas?
So, yeah, this was in Kansas City, Missouri. But he did train at the Menninger Clinic in Topeka, Kansas when that was there. It's they're known for psychoanalysis. So.
Oh, okay, cool. I was going to say, interesting place to stumble across ayahuasca. Like somebody who is interested in that.
Right. Yeah. No, I happen to be very blessed by having access to two fantastic child psychiatry preceptors there. Not only this gentleman, Dr. Manuel Morales, who's from Peru, but also Martin Maldonado, who is originally from Mexico City, just helping really to give me a very broad worldview of mental health practice, coming from their backgrounds, and then meeting them in the Midwest. It's very interesting. Yeah.
And I really like that concept of looking at it as medicine versus, say, more of like a novel thing. I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but this girl I dated was from Peru, and I remember asking her I was like, oh, what do you know about ayahuasca? And she's like, well, I don't know, it's medicine. I was like, well, what do you mean it's medicine? Because by the time I've already heard about ayahuasca, I've been studying all this stuff, and she's like, oh, I don't know, it's just medicine. Like, you get sick, you go see the shaman, and they give you medicine. And my mind was just like, what? Like, if I asked like a Westerner this, they'd be telling me about like the cosmic serpent and clearing chakras and stuff. And just knowing that that's part of their cosmology. And it's just like, yeah, I don't know. That's just what it is. Like, okay.
Right. Well, and quite honestly, I feel like that's probably the most accurate way of looking at it. I mean, this is one of the very few medicines that really does treat the whole person. Because like, even in medical school, we're taught that the person is body, mind, and spirit, which is all great. But the practicality of that is you learn a lot about the body, you learn a decent amount about the mind, and then once you get to the realm of spirit, they're like, yeah, that's like religion and stuff, and I don't know, they can talk to the religious person. But really, ayahuasca and other psychedelic medicines, they're able to tap into all of those different aspects of the self and help to correct dysfunction in all of those areas. So yeah, I mean, I argue it is probably one of the most powerful medicines that we do have.
Yeah. And how long have you been researching this for, or just having interest?
Let me think. I guess I haven't thought about it. So this point has probably been close to about 8 years that I've been trying to study it somewhat seriously. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I certainly have experimented with other psychedelic substances back like in undergraduate type scenarios, but I really don't count any of that. Just because I don't think that I had the respect or the reverence or knew what I was playing with at the time. But yeah, so modern time frame, maybe about 8 years of taking this stuff seriously and considering it for healing.
Yeah. And how has that changed your psychiatry like practice, or just like an influence on like, I'm sure psychedelics have definitely kind of completely shifted a traditional view of psychiatry and mental health, right? Yeah,
well, again, I mean, the right now it has informed it certainly to a good amount, but as much as I'd like it to be able to, not as much, just due to the legality aspects and how a lot of these substances are still under investigation to be able to be used in clinical practice. But I will say that I've put a lot of emphasis on mindfulness and meditation for a very long time. And also really trying to find and help people look at their life through multiple different objective points of view, rather than just relying on their own subjective experience of just like, well, what does this mean to me? Being able to talk about, okay, well, what does your mom think about this? What would your friend think about this? because I do think that one of the big things that psychedelics do is allow you to just take a step back and have this more broad view of yourself. Other things that have been very helpful, which you guys are probably even more familiar with than I am, there's a certain form of meditation that I've utilized myself and I try to teach patients all the time that's very much like a mini form of breath work. So I first, again, before I was kind of like reading and learning more about it, I was kind of calling it sustained hyperventilation meditation, because that's roughly kind of what it is. And I would just tell people like, all right, so the goal is you're just going to breathe in and out for like 2 to 5 minutes. And then you'll feel good. And this worked, but for whatever reason, people had a really hard time grasping on to that concept, because if you don't give instruction to patients, I don't know, somehow they get confused. They really want, like, doc, just tell me the exact, like, do A, B, and C, and then I'll get better. And so just breathe in and out for 5 minutes is too confusing. But that's been very useful in helping people, with mild to moderate, like depression, anxiety, minimize medications. Certainly has been extremely useful at helping people cut down on cannabis use, like teens who are getting into trouble. I've not gotten anyone to quit, to be perfectly honest, but I mean, we're talking about using maybe about, like a half of an ounce a day, which is kind of ridiculous, down to a very moderate level of like, maybe a bowl like 2 days a week. I mean, that guy I was working with for maybe about a year, but I mean, like I feel like that's a substantial change. And again, like no like prescription medicine there. That's just, breathing to allow one to feel better. Over time, like I said, where I was doing the non-directive approach, ever since maybe about a year and a half ago. I don't know how familiar you guys are with a guy named Wim Hof. Mm-hmm. But he has his Wim Hof method, which is I would say it's similar to like a holotropic breathing, but it's a little bit different, and it's got that regimented, 30 breaths in and out, hold your breath again, do multiple rounds. So I've been incorporating that, and people have taken on to that a little bit easier just because it is regimented. But honestly, I kind of feel like any way you can just breathe is helpful. The only other psychedelic thing that I think that maybe I utilize or recommend on a semi-regular basis would be like sensory deprivation tanks. Those can be certainly helpful for people with anxiety. Although at the same time, that population is the very first group to say, oh, hell no, I'm not going to hop into a tank where I close the door and I can't see anything. But the people that have gone and stuck with it have certainly benefited from it. So that's more or less the extent in clinical practice thus far. I'm hoping new things will be on the horizon here pretty soon.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't necessarily mean like intervention or technique, but maybe philosophy and perspective, like going through a traditional medical training and maybe thinking more along the lines of medication and whatnot, and then being exposed to like either a psychedelic experience or psychedelic research and kind of maybe reframing the way you look at the psyche and like how to approach that.
Yeah, I think that it added to my, my style, I guess. But I don't think that it changed it dramatically when I started to incorporate it. I've always been considered a little bit odd, at least by fellow clinicians, just because I've been one that's taken what I call like a whole person perspective to mental health, which you would think that would be normal, but for whatever reason that's somewhat odd in the field of psychiatry.
So you've always kind of been in this realm a little bit then? A
little bit, yeah. I mean, like I've relied a lot more on psychotherapy in the past, but then not only that, but I do a lot of work with supplements, nothing crazy, but just very basic stuff, like incorporate like omega-3 fish oil, something called N-acetylcysteine. I don't know if you've ever heard of that before, but it's just an amino acid. It's very, very powerful, can help with a lot of different things. On top of just your traditional medication management. And I think that's, I don't know, it's been a blessing and a curse. It's cool because I think that, patients really like it and appreciate it. But at the same time, I think a lot of people struggle. I can't find a place to totally fit in because it's very similar to kind of like a functional medicine approach, but I don't take the full functional medicine approach. And then I also do all the traditional psychiatric stuff, but I don't do I will, but I don't rely on that only. So it's like a little bit of everything. I kind of feel like the more tools in your toolkit you have, the better off you are, and everything's just a tool.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Awesome.
What was that amino acid called again?
N-acetylcysteine.
N-acetylcysteine. I found acetylcysteine. Forgot the N.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, we'll link that. That's an interesting one.
Yeah, helpful for autism, OCD, anxiety. Side effects are minimal. It's available over the counter. Read up on it. It's good stuff.
Cool. So do you have any kind of extraordinary experiences to share regarding Wim Hof method that you've run into? It sounds like you might.
I don't know about Wim Hof per se, but just when I was trying to experiment with just what I'm going to call holotropic breath work on my own. I guess maybe I shouldn't even use that because that's trademark.
It's fine. You're not at risk unless you're selling stuff.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I'm not selling anything. But breathing in and out while listening to some music while laying down in your bed, I think that did help me a lot with my own anxiety and trying to be able to cope with stuff. In particular, when I was transitioning from the time when I was in residency to fellowship, because during the application process, this could be an interesting side note. So the way that it works with medical education, when you're doing any kind of residency program, you have to go through what's called a match. So you interview at all these different places, and then you rank like 1 through whatever, like all the different programs that you'd be interested in going to. And then you submit that, and then a few months later, they're after going through what's called a lottery, they say, okay, you're going here. And so that time in one's life can be very stressful because like you're going on all these interviews like all over the country, and then you kind of rank them and you're like, I don't know what the heck is going to happen in a few months. And so, I mean, this was one of the techniques that I was using a lot during that time. And the one, I don't know if I want to say like one day in particular, because it's happened a couple of times, but the most significant time I was laying on my bed and I just had this feeling of just complete terror and panic. I mean, like I got a little anxious and nervous a number of times when I've been breathing, but this is different. I mean, this is like I am going to die, and I just had to sit with it. And I was telling myself, you know what? I'm feeling this way because I'm breathing this way. I know I can start breathing normal at any time. You've been doing this for about 20 minutes. The plan was to do 45 if I felt like it. Let's just keep breathing. And so I kept breathing and breathing. And it was going for that terror, and then all of a sudden it just kind of floated away. And I was just in this place of just peace and bliss, and everything was awesome. And that lasted for probably about 15 minutes or whatever until I was done breathing. And that I would say would probably be the most powerful experience that I had personally, just at least by myself, with the breath work. And I try to, share that, or at least bits and pieces of that with people when I'm coaching them on it, saying like, look, you may become terrified. That's okay. Just remind yourself that I am choosing to breathe this way. I can breathe normal at any time. And if you do start breathing normal again, you're going to feel okay pretty quick.
Yeah, our teachers always say, and I guess I got this from Stan, was never give up an opportunity for death and dismemberment. So when that terror comes and you feel like, there might be like some death upon you, if you're in this holotropic realm of, say, a lion's about to eat you, like go into it. What would that feel like? Usually, you pass out on the other side and it resolves.
Yeah. Fortunately or unfortunately, I guess I've only died, or quote unquote died, like once during any kind of a psychedelic or breathwork type of experience. And actually it was during a breathwork session. It's never been under the influence of a substance. And yeah, that experience is very, very powerful. Unfortunately, just whenever I've gotten so close, whenever there has been some sort of a substance involved, like that terror and just that feeling like I'm going to die, I just haven't been able to like cross the threshold or do it. So yeah, maybe someday, but I'm not too worried about it actually. I used to be, but I'm like, if it happens, it happens. If not,
Yeah, I've kind of come around to that too. It's okay to chill out. You don't need to die every time. You don't need to do 5 grams every time, guys. It's okay.
No. I mean, you don't always got to be a hero. That's for sure.
Amen. I don't think that's said enough. It's okay to do a little bit, guys. You don't have to go to the moon.
Yeah,
every week.
But I mean, that's actually really important because I think we all can do a little bit almost all the time. But it's very rare that you can kind of get yourself in a position where you're like, I'm going to go do this 110% and then keep that up. But just doing a little bit of something, and this is not talking about psychedelics at all, but I mean, just anything positive, just on small increments on a daily basis, that's going to add up over time and be way more powerful.
Well, it's actually a good transition then. So often we talk about kind of overuse. I think maybe we talk about overuse a little too much, but it's just me being paranoid and wanting to do harm reduction. But we see this trend sometimes people who use regularly, maybe even with microdosers, we don't know yet, but it's kind of like this cumulative thing that could lead you to some sort of manic or breakdown state. Do you have any experience working with people like that, or do you have any thoughts around that?
I mean, I've certainly met some people that you kind of wonder maybe they did too many drugs and sort of fried their brain. I think a number of people have run into those individuals. One person in particular who did fit that, I met in a forensic psychiatry evaluation on the not guilty by reason of insanity unit.
Wow.
This back in Missouri, yeah. And I forget the crime that he was accused of. I think he did murder somebody. But his argument was he was paranoid at the time and he thought they were going to kill him and all this kind of stuff. And he described his experience of one of being stuck in between dimensions, and how he, if he sat long enough, the walls, wherever he was, would start to move, and he'd start to see these geometric shapes. And in particular, I remember it was octagons or hexagons. I mean, he was very specific, and he was talking about how he could see the buildings move and how there's a total other reality that is sitting right next to us all the time. And I do remember coming back over and talking to the person who was supervising me at the time, saying I mean, yeah, all right, this guy's psychotic, I'm not going to lie about it, but the flavor of this is just so different. And he's describing that which people have, that experience which people have when they're they take some sort of a psychedelic substance. And I wonder if this is pure schizophrenia that we're thinking, or if this is maybe something else, because he had no family history of it. And who knows, honestly, maybe that could be a presentation of purely psychotic illness. But that was one time, since he did have a significant history of lots of LSD use, as well as lots of MDMA and lots of psilocybin use, that I'm kind of thinking maybe this is one of those times where, kind of like what Stan Groff talks about, if you're not able to process through whatever's coming up, you're gonna somehow get stuck. And either that trauma is going to be plaguing you in your waking life, or somehow you're going to, again, get stuck in between whatever state you're in. And I'm wondering if this guy was just stuck. But I don't know. I don't answer. I mean, this is years ago, and I don't know what happened to the guy.
That statement by Stan saved my life, by the way.
Yeah?
Because I got stuck in between realms for a little bit, and it was pretty terrifying. And that's how I came across Groff's work. I just needed some sort of framework to work with. And when I read that, I was like, oh my God, this makes so much sense, because I was out hiking. I wasn't really paying attention, which was surfacing. It was probably all unconscious material just cycling through, and it's just still processing. But have you ever come across Stan's theory on spiritual emergence?
I've read a couple of his books and listened to a number of lectures. It's not ringing a bell, and I kind of feel like I should know this, but whenever you feel like you should know something and it doesn't pop to mind, you should just say, I don't know. And please teach. Tell me about it. What's up, pal?
they coined this term spiritual emergence, and I think it really kind of started over at Esalen. Dick Price and Michael Murphy were doing a lot of stuff over there at the time as well. But just this concept that when we're engaging in, say, non-ordinary states and through psychedelics or meditation, Kundalini, that we can activate this energy inside, and it can cause a psycho-spiritual crisis, and it can look like psychosis.
Yes.
You could get into an acute psychosis where people are just talking about energy, they're hallucinating, they're hearing voices. But Stan's framework is these can be really transformative experiences if our culture and the mental health world can kind of hold that and frame that instead of just labeling it as psychosis. But it's kind of like a tricky dance. But yeah, it might sound like that person constantly engaging in self-discovery through psychedelics could have brought on some sort of spiritual emergence process, and not living in a culture where we can contain that or we really understand that, then we go and label it as psychosis and just kind of progresses from there.
Right. And it's really sad. I mean, and you think about quite probably the whole reason why this guy committed whatever crime he was committing is because he was still stuck in the state and he wasn't supported through it. And now he's locked up probably forever. And somebody had some really bad thing that happened to him just because probably had no one to talk to at the time about this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Kyle and I talk about it, how tricky it is to really label that spiritual emergence or an actual thing that you should for sure be hospitalized and medicated with. It's a really tricky, Kyle said it already, but a really tricky dance. And we talk about it a bunch, and we just, the culture is not there yet, unfortunately, to support.
Well, but I mean, do we need to not hospitalize or treat when this happens? I mean, so I would argue that perhaps we need to be open enough and have our clinicians be open enough so that you could bring someone like this in. However, also not just treat it like, okay, well, this is a disease process that's going on. We got to stop this now and we got to shut it down, but really kind of work with them and try to see if we can't work something out. And two, this is, I would argue any good psychiatrist would be willing to engage in this process. Now, the unfortunate thing is in the outpatient world, we don't have the time to do that just because insurance isn't going to pay for us to spend hours doing psychotherapy with clients. You can, but again, you don't get nearly reimbursed at the same rate as you would doing the medication management. And so then that ends up going to just our psychiatrists and social worker people who are doing the actual therapy. And I think a lot of them are equipped, but still, I don't know, I think there's something lacking. And again, not to say, anything bad about anybody's training, but I think that, again, taking the whole person perspective, having the medical background, the therapy background, and also engaging in a very, open, healthy, positive way is the way to go, rather than, all right, what's the disease? Let's fix it. This too might be coming from the fact that I'm an osteopathic physician. There's a difference between there's a DO, that would be me, and then an MD, so an allopathic physician. That our training is a little bit different, being that at least when I was in osteopathic medical school, the ethos is the body has the ability to heal itself. You just got to kind of put it in alignment so that all of the body's natural processes can take over to kind of fix whatever's going on. Whereas typically, and I do realize some of this is changing in modern times, but the allopathic view is, okay, we have a disease that is harming our patient, and we need to figure out what disease that is, identify it, and kill that disease so the patient can get better. It's similar, the approach, but the direction of how you're treating things is almost opposite.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and two with the treatment, there were some houses in the 60s in the Bay Area, and one specifically called Soteria was run by Lauren Mosier, who is the director of the schizophrenic department of the National Institute of Mental Health, and that was peer run. And so people lived there for 3 to 6 months, and then you had John Ware Perry. I believe he had diapasis. There was another one. I always forget it. It's no name backwards. Emanon, is that how you say it? But yeah, since it was peer run, I mean, it really cut down on the price, the cost of it. And Lauren Mosher's outcome was really great. I mean, he was working with people with early episode psychosis, and I think they had around 70% success rate of not treating people with medication, just letting it kind of run their course, and providing that safe space for people to let that unfold. And I'm not too sure if Lauren Mosher kind of embodied that spiritual emergence framework, but a lot of those places out in the Bay Area at that time kind of had a little bit of that, I believe.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, even people with really profound psychosis can do very well as long as they have a very structured environment and they're surrounded by people that they know they can trust. And I'm just trying to think of, since there's an awesome documentary, and I'm not going to remember the exact name, but it was on it was a musician. He passed away a number of years ago, but his name was Wesley Willis. I don't know if you remember him or not. Yeah. But I think he was on Howard Stern a lot. But they had a documentary and how talking about how he lived with his family that he really trusted and respected, and he was able to get off of his medications towards the end of his life and live a fairly good life for the remaining years that he had. Of course, unfortunately, he passed away from medical complications. They were largely secondary to some of the antipsychotics he was taking because it caused him to gain so much weight, which is kind of the main thing that happens to a lot of people who are put on those kind of medications if you're not careful.
Yeah. Yeah, just thinking about that makes me, it'd be so cool to see little places pop up for psychedelic aftercare, or people that went down to Peru and had a really tough experience, or just, people in the States that had a tough experience where they could go to a house and really maybe work through their process. And it'd be cool if we could see some of those in the future.
I agree 100%. That is one other project that I did not mention that's going on a little bit, not quite to the same extent here in Chicago. There's a free integration circle that's being hosted once a month. I have not been part of that as of yet, just because I'm doing so many different things I haven't been able to join. I think they just have their second meeting this month. Maybe it's the third. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys. But I know one of your former guests, Ville Marie, she's part of that group. As are two other therapists who work here in town. So we're trying, and I think that would be fantastic to open that type of a thing up to a wider audience for sure.
Yeah.
We're seeing that in a fair amount of cities, which is cool. I love the fact that people are organizing more and more now. I know it was just maybe 2 years ago where there were barely any psychedelic clubs. And now they're all over the place, and they vary too, right? From more scientific interest to community to integration circles. I know the Denver Psychedelic Club started doing once a month integration circles as well, which is awesome. And I'm really happy to hear that Ville Marie's involved in the community too. She seems like a really strong player.
She's fantastic. I have no doubt that she's going to do some amazing things in her career. She's still young, but yeah. I don't know. Whatever she's doing, I tend to try to follow that as well. Yeah. But you bring up something very interesting. I mean, there is this zeitgeist, I guess, that has sort of emerged in the past, I would say about 2 years. And I subconsciously was part of that. As I mentioned, I started this meetup group roughly about 2 years ago. And a lot of these other groups started roughly about 2 years ago. Why? I have no idea. But something was happening that I guess we were all just feeling something needed to happen, something needed to change. And I'm really excited that people are stepping up and trying to open up this conversation, because and maybe, I don't know if this is a good time of any, but we're talking about all these different things, academic circles, just random places for people to hang out and talk, integration circles. What I think is most important is just the fact that we're all talking about this stuff. Mm-hmm. And that we're open to having serious discussions as adults about what does this mean? How can we use this to our benefit? What is this tool that we have, that we've been given? And I personally, again, am trying to push for the concept of looking at this. Yeah, this is a very, very powerful medicine and should be treated with respect. I know some people think that, still there's absolutely room for recreational use, and perhaps there is. Just because I think that sometimes, you can have an experience that would be minorly spiritual in nature, but not necessarily ultimately healing, that can be positive. But still, I mean, everything, I don't know, all things in moderation, pretty moderation. I don't know where I was going with this train of thought, other than I think it's awesome more people are talking about this, and I think we need more people to talk about this, and that's the only way we're going to get this movement to move forward. And by all means, this is a movement. Because it is, at this point, I firmly do not believe this is about a lack of science. It's not a lack of research. Actually, these substances have been around for a lot longer than most medicines that we've had, and have been researched a whole heck of a lot longer than a lot of things that are currently out there. Granted, some of the older research does not pass the modern standards for what is a proper research trial, does not mean it's not good research. And also, we have some fantastic research coming out like almost daily at this point, from like Beckley and Maps and Hefter, that they've just been doing like just phenomenal studies and having phenomenal outcomes. I mean, the phase 3 clinical trial for the MDMA got like a breakthrough designation, and it looks like they might be opening that up to what's called compassionate use even before the medication is fully FDA available. Like getting other clinics on board to provide this healing to people with PTSD, because we have no good cures for that stuff.
Yeah, it'd be awesome if they get approved for expanded access. It would be so great.
Yeah.
Hopefully that happens. Crossing our fingers for it.
Knock on wood, but I mean, I think that it's very, very likely. And so, we're all talking about 2021, but I think we might need to be prepared that this could happen a little bit sooner. Yeah, it's going to be a lot more regulated, but regulation is not necessarily a bad thing. Helps to provide, some safety. And I'm very hopeful we're going to be able to help a lot of people very, very soon.
I'm actually curious about your position on recreational use.
Sure.
So it's obviously a huge part of psychedelia is recreational. We have the 60s. We have, people in the CIA back in the day spiking each other. I guess recreational use, but not very ethical. But even today, I think we're almost at a peak of psychedelic use in the world, and most of it is recreational. I'm personally not seeing too much explicit harm, but what I'm seeing is kind of like a lack of education and context around this stuff.
Yeah.
And like I was saying earlier, potential of going overboard, having like an extreme psychological reaction, either mania or depression or whatever. What are you seeing there, or what are your thoughts or concerns around that?
The biggest concern is it's just kind of it's not, there's nothing that's all bad or nothing that's all good. And I do not want to try to single out or shame anybody that's ever been using psychedelics for recreational purposes. But at the same time, I do think that there, in many cases, is a very big missed opportunity where if all that you're doing is using a substance like this to have a good time, I guess that's fine. But really, there's just so much more that could be had, and so much more that could be learned about yourself and also the world around you. But I don't know. I mean, like I as far as recreational use, I think that if you are initiated into the psychedelic process and you understand what you're getting into, kind of like what other people have talked about, like if you basically earned your quote unquote psychedelic driver's license, then it's probably fine to utilize such substances in whatever way you see fit, probably. But again, you need some training first. If you don't have that and you're just going at it willy-nilly, you're right, there's probably not as much physical harm as there would be for other substances, but I would argue that there is a good potential for psychic harm that could happen that probably is not getting reported, and it's just popping up in very, very small ways that could certainly be avoided had there been like a responsible guide available or somebody to help or just to talk to and process the experience after the fact. And that's my biggest concern is like, what are what are the little things that are going on? Like what about like the guy who is I don't know, traumatized as a kid, a lot of physical abuse that now, it was always pretty bad, but now for whatever reason, there's one scenario that's just stuck in his head all the time, can't get it out. It's actually worse rather than better. Or somebody that they're just anxious all the time. That's actually probably the more common one, is just people get just a little bit paranoid, not to the point where it's, really problematic, but, they just don't like to do things quite as much. And then I think that's probably the thing that ends up leading people down the road of using more drugs rather than less drugs, because they're self-medicating over it. Not saying at all that psychedelics are a gateway drug at all, because they're not. They're probably the opposite of that. Because like I think I've maybe met one person, well, I guess after now going to a couple of psychedelic sciences, I've met a couple people now who probably use psychedelics on a way more regular basis than most. But by and large, the majority of people that I've met that have used psychedelics, this is like, yeah, I did it like once last year, and I don't want to do that again for like at least another year or two, but I'll probably do it at some point, but I don't know when, that kind of thing. I feel like I'm rambling on here.
No, you're doing a lot of good stuff there. I tend to agree. It's people are going to keep partying, right? It's not like they can make psychedelics more illegal,
right?
Or at least acid. But it's an interesting thing. I do think you're right, though, that there are risks, and they're underrepresented when people talk about it.
Yeah.
And I think one of the solutions, other than just kind of really good self-care and seeing a therapist or psychiatrist, would be abstinence for a little while. Like maybe you only do drugs once every 6 weeks, which is, probably pretty fine. But, you could get put on edge, though. That's still a lot of, if you're doing like 3 hits of acid every 6 weeks, that's still probably a little too much.
It's a decent amount. It's a decent amount.
Yeah. And in one go, I mean, like you're probably not going to be recovered fully in your internal processes at that point. You could be, but, who knows? It's hard saying, because we don't really have that data yet.
Right. Well, and speaking of one of the most underrepresented risks, I want to point out, I mean, like there's the whole phenomenon of microdosing that's becoming like huge. And everyone's saying, including Fadiman, that, the reports of negative outcomes are very, very small. And probably they are. And not a lot of people are having a lot of problems. But I will say that me personally, I experimented a little bit with microdosing of a substance. I'm not going to necessarily say what substance. And my experience was less than positive. It was not bad. But on the days that I did it, I did feel a little bit lighter, but I did notice I was distracted more than usual. Mm-hmm. And the distraction was normally like, I really want to be outside and I don't want to be doing whatever I'm doing right now, which again, not the worst thing in the world, but when you have stuff that you want to do and pay attention to doing, this is not a positive thing. And then the other thing that I noticed, and this is a very personal thing about me, that I felt like I really wanted to drink some alcohol, which to me was very disturbing. Just because in the past, I've certainly used that as a crutch. I haven't for a number of years, but just the fact that that kind of came up in the context of microdosing, I was like, you know what? That's not really something that, because I haven't really thought that way in a number of years for a really long time. And if this is what's coming up right now and I'm distracted, even if I feel all right, I don't know if this is like more positive than just living my day-to-day life. And so like I haven't played around with microdosing after that. That's just me personally. And it might have just been the one substance I was using. I don't know. But I think that all things have risks and benefits, and we need to discuss both to make an informed decision.
We were Kyle and I attended the Horizons conference this year, and there was a microdosing panel that Symposia put on. It was wonderful.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
Did you catch the live stream?
I caught about half of it. I happened to have been out like in a remote area. My in-laws, they've got a cabin in the woods, and I was trying to live stream it like from my phone to my laptop, and then my laptop died. So it was good what I saw.
So there was some discussion there around people being anxious, becoming more anxious. So like, I think intellectuals, for one, probably carry a little more anxiety than others because we're thinking so much. And I believe that microdosing could really amp that up quite a bit, to the point where, like you're saying, you want to self-medicate a little bit with beer or whatever. But yeah, like there is something there. And I don't know if you caught all the discussions around the potential heart valve thickening. What was it, Kyle? The 5-HT2B receptor site?
2B, yeah.
Yeah, so this interaction there, thickening of heart valves, it's something that was a discussed risk there. But, again, there's no data. And, if you want to do an N of 1 thing, you look at Amanda Fielding, who is on stage at Horizons talking about how much acid she has done in her life. And she has 0 cardiac issues. But that, again, N of 1, it's really hard to get any real good data on that. I guess any drugs that do that 5-HT2B receptor site agonist, whatever it is, they just don't get approval to test those drugs, which is very interesting. And something that we got to watch.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know about the actual heart thickening in and of itself. I'd be very interested to learn more about that because I haven't done perhaps as much reading as I need to purely on the microdosing aspects of the dangers of that. But like one of the main concerns with psychedelics in general is if you do have hypertension, almost all of them can, dramatically cause a hypertensive crisis. Maybe. Again, it's not always going to happen, but it could happen. So you got to watch out for that. The more interesting thing, though, particularly with microdosing and the supposed benefit, is all the anti-inflammatory effect, which people do talk about, but I'm really hoping we're going to be able to study that in and of itself a lot more. Because we're riddled with inflammatory stuff in our environment, just the foods that we eat, stress in general. We're constantly walking around in an inflamed state. And in fact, a lot of the, like I was mentioning, the supplement stuff that I do, most of that's targeting like inflammation. And that's the mechanism through which a lot of people get better. So I really do wonder if the majority of, particularly the microdosing, is through this anti-inflammatory mechanism that it's tapping into that people are feeling better from rather than some other thing.
Is that just like a hypothesis of yours, or is there some sort of research that came out about that?
David Nichols' son actually does a bunch of research around this.
Oh,
Charles Nichols. He's been on. So if anybody's curious, he's. I haven't listened to the second one, but there's the Smart Drugs Smart.
Yeah, it was so good.
Yeah, the first one he was on was amazing. I listened to it twice. I want to listen to it a third time. And then he was just on. I don't know if it was like last week for round 2. That I listened to a little bit, but I was doing something else at the time. I was like, I got to pause this, and I just want to wait and like listen to it when I can like attend to everything that's being said. I'm hoping I can reach out to that guy and talk to him, maybe get him to a meetup. So hey, shout out to Charles Nichols if he happens to be listening to your guys' podcast. That'd be amazing. I want to talk to you.
Yeah, we can only hope that he's listening to the show, but we'd love to have him on the show.
Yeah.
That's I was blown away by the fact that there are actual people doing research on this, and the fact that he's actually using a really rare psychedelic for his research too.
What's he using?
Matt, do you remember?
Isn't it just a derivative of LSD?
It's maybe no. It was almost like no, I can't remember. I don't even want to misquote it. But he was saying that there are prescription psychedelics for certain issues like obesity. So like they're prescribing it, and at a I don't really want to call it subperceptual, but subperceptual dose can help a substantial amount of people. But if they take too much of it, it's like a really intense long trip.
It was one of these newer weight loss drugs, and if you take like 2 or 3 times the amount, that you have a highly, highly anxiety provoking psychedelic experience. I can't remember the name of the medication offhand. I know it starts with a B. I've been very seriously considering just like because I can write a prescription. I could try this with willing subjects, but I don't know, that maybe needs to be researched on its own. But it sounds very interesting.
Right. There's always Xanax.
I guess.
Yeah.
That happens to be one of my least favorite medicines in all of medicine. It's very useful medicine, but it's got a lot of baggage with it.
Do you mean about like if somebody's taking it like daily or something, or form a habit around it or something?
Yeah, well, so the problem with Xanax is it's in your system and out of your system so fast. It's very, very similar to cocaine.
Right.
So like almost any time you take it, when it's coming out, you go through a mini withdrawal. And that's why it's so incredibly addictive, not just physically, but psychologically, which then leads to the physical addiction.
Right.
That being said, it is probably one of the most useful things for true panic disorder out there. So it is like everything else. It's a tool and can be used. But I think that that's one, it probably can and should be more judiciously used than perhaps it is most often used in practice.
Right. Yeah. It's horrifying to me that people would be on that daily.
Agreed.
Yeah. I find it useful. I think like for psychedelic people, it's probably good to have an emergency stash on hand, just in the event of a really bad experience that needs to get under control. For instance, police could get involved or something.
Sure.
Yeah, or you're at a festival and all you want to do is run in the middle of the highway. Like maybe that's a good case to give your friend a Xanax. But
Although to be fair, like the ideal scenario is doing stuff like what Zendo does when you're set up at a concert, just kind of like providing a safe environment where you can kind of contain somebody and hold that space they need. Or if you happen to have a trained clinician available who can kind of talk somebody through and work them through the experience, that is way more ideal than using a chemical abort button.
Right. Absolutely.
Just because it increases the likelihood of them getting stuck so much more.
Yeah.
So then you might have to reinduce that state again to get them to work through whatever it is that they're stuck in.
It's totally true.
Stan talks about that all the time in his books of just like it's
those
not
were
good
like
to just stop that
Thorazine
process.
injections, right?
Yeah, I mean, like anything, like any kind of a sedative, Thorazine, Haldol, Xanax, whatever. I mean, it's all just going to make you tired and kind of bring you down. Yeah, but ideally, you just kind of wait it out. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
That's one of the main things. Like, at least my own personal experience, what other people have said too, or I've mentioned to them. If you're ever in a bad place, particularly with any kind of psychedelic, clock is your friend, because almost certainly that each one of these things has a certain duration of time that it's going to be there for. And if you know that, say, like it's currently 8 p.m. when we're recording, that okay, if this is going to last, I don't know, like another 12 hours, by 8 a.m., I'm not going to feel this way anymore. And I just got to do my time.
That's really interesting. I don't know, this is like a total just like random thought or hypothesis, but I've been reading Peter Levine's book, is it In an Unspoken Voice, but he's like a psychologist. And somatic practitioner, so he develops somatic experiencing, and he was talking about how when people are kind of in this like flight and fright response, and they go into surgery. So like he was talking about kids just being like really anxious about going into surgery, and when the doctors will just put them under, like while they're kind of freaking out, they can kind of develop PTSD. Afterwards, or kind of develop these trauma responses. And, he was saying that there's like pretty well documented cases of people kind of in that state and not letting the nervous system kind of shake it off before putting people under or kind of restraining them, and kind of like just cutting that off right away and suppressing it. People can develop like trauma responses later on, which is kind of interesting.
I mean, that would make sense. I'm not familiar with this author in particular, but yeah, I mean, I think that's a good hypothesis.
He's apparently very popular in the 5-MeO DMT world.
Okay.
So, worth checking out. I'm actually looking at getting trained in his method or another one called Hakomi. They're kind of like similar origins. It's just like, probably a 10-degree spin on each one. So Matt, we're at about an hour. Do you have anything you want to throw out before we wrap here?
Let's see. I mean, I've covered a lot of ground. I mean, like the main things that I want to ensure that everyone gets out of this is number one, psychedelic substances are not necessarily needed to have a psychedelic experience. I can't state that enough. I like to look at them, and a lot of other people have talked about it the same way too, but that they're very much like training wheels so that you can know what to look for in your own like breathwork practice, meditative practice, when you hop in the tank, that kind of a thing. So that's number one. Number two, the importance of community. And just how if you don't know anybody that's talking about this stuff where you are, I promise you there's some other people who are thinking about it. And if you're brave enough to just start talking about it and asking questions, you're going to find somebody else who's interested in it. And all that it takes is two people. And as you sit down and talk, more people will come. Because like I said, the whole meetup thing, I didn't think anyone was going to show up. I really thought this was just going to be just other people that I invited. We started off meeting at a coffee shop in town. Very quickly, within maybe about I don't know, I'd have to go look through, but like 4 or 5 months, we outgrew that place entirely because the interest was so much. So it is one of those things. If you build it, they will come. I mean, there are people out there. And I guess those are the two main things. I don't know. I don't really have anything else.
Fantastic. And do you have a personal website people could check you out on, or do you want to give out some of the club websites?
Sure. I'll give out lots of stuff. So I can be reached on Twitter at Dr. Matt Brown, doctor spelled out, DOCTOR, Matt Brown. My website, which is mostly for my private practice, is www.dr, not spelled out, drmattbrown.com. The website for the Chicago Psychedelic Club is Shy Psychedelic on Facebook. And yeah, I guess that's about it. You can find all of my other contacts and stuff through any of those. And of course the meetup group, Psychedelics in the Future of Psychiatry on Meetup. If you just put a meetup in psychedelics, I think it's like we're the first thing that pops up in Google.
Fantastic. Yeah, we'll include all the links in the show notes so people just check out our site with Matt's post, and you'll find us there. So Matt, thanks a ton. Let's hang out for a minute after we stop recording here and debrief. Thanks again.
Sure. Thank you, guys.
Odds are good you've been in a strange situation regarding somebody handing you some drug and you didn't know how to use it. Even if it was, you were 17 years old and somebody handed you a joint and you go, doesn't this make me go crazy? How do you level up your knowledge and get a handle on what drugs are safe, how to do drugs, how to know if this stuff is okay to do? Like, does LSD cause chromosome damage, that big lie from the 60s, 70s, and it doesn't. So how do you clear these things up? Kyle and I developed a class, Navigating Psychedelics, and it is, consider it a 101, 102 of psychedelics. How to do them, how to be safe, how to make sure you and your friends don't go to prison or go to the hospital. And we walk you through a lot of that process. We do some live support through our secret and closed Facebook group. There's also the ability to communicate inside the course. We are going to start offering regular live check-ins, webinar check-ins to folks, and that can really help support the process. So far, the feedback has been tremendous. People are very excited about the class and are shocked at the amount of value we've thrown in there. We did a whole bunch of master classes with experts in particular sub aspects of psychedelics. The folks who are featured as masterclass teachers, Lenny Gibson, PhD, Elizabeth Gibson, those are both our breathwork teachers. Larry Norris from Erie on integration, Paul Austin on microdosing, Shannon Claire Carlin, she works for MAP, she's great. Catherine McLean, PhD, Ashley Booth, MS, Neil Marshall Goldsmith, PhD, Mitchell Gomez, executive director of Dance Safe, Julie Megler, MSN, so she's a nurse practitioner that also works at Erie with Larry Norris. Dr. Richard Grossman, who's a acupuncturist, he's got a PhD on ayahuasca, light hearts and safety, we called that one. Ville-Marie Narlock from the Students for Sensible Drug Policy. Michelle Hobart, MS, Spiritual Emergence and Self-Care. Dr. Ingmar Gorman, clinical psychologist who works closely with Catherine McLean in New York. And that's it for now, but we're going to keep adding more. I think we're going to get one with Daniel McQueen soon, so keep an eye out for that. And I hope you have the opportunity to check it out. If you want to get better educated on psychedelics, this is a great way to start. even if you've been around for a long time, you might have picked up some, hippie wisdom or something that might not necessarily be right, about brown acid or black acid or whatever. Kind of all just one molecule. You can test for that molecule and know that you've got a molecule. Maybe there's some side additives, but this is stuff that we really need to figure out and get straight. We need a baseline of knowledge as a community here, and this is our contribution to that. So you can learn more at psychedelicstoday.com, and if you want to go right to our site, it's psychedelicstoday.teachable.com.